Good morning, folks. So this is just a little bit of a continuation of that project I was working on last night. So I was looking at the dots. I was looking at the piece that it was making, and I realized that this image resource can have multiple images. So if I go to my input of that particular node, you'll notice that there are three different options. And what I'm doing is I'm using a read to change between the three different sets. So I have an int in, which right here is like a choice selector. So I have dots 1, dots 2, and dots 3. Now typically I would probably have these in a different order. As you'll notice that these dots here are larger than these dots, and then these dots are the largest. So I'd probably have these in order more, where I'd have, the smallest to largest. However, this was just something I already had pre-created, so I'd hindsight, right? So, but what's really interesting about this is then later on down the line, I could select between the three options, which is pretty interesting. I'm able to randomly generate between the 9 and get this kind of randomly generated option, which I think is pretty interesting. I could increase the random speed so that it's a little bit more fluid. And I've added some other, options to change the way in which it looks and the color and how it's added. I think this is a very interesting kind of process. I think that this could potentially do a lot of different things just by simply changing out your sprite sheets. The ability to make the sprite sheets in another program and then import them in. Now, the biggest issue that you're going to run into is that the sprite sheets would have to be fairly large, I think. Well, it depends. So the issue is that, like right now, I'm using 1920 by 1080, right? But my sprite sheets are not that large. I think this sprite sheet here is 1080 by 1080, if I'm not mistaken. So that means each one of these squares is roughly somewhere between 250 and 300, maybe. So that means that if you have 250 and 300 pixels wide by large, we'll say, just for the sake of an argument, if that's the case, then you're going to start seeing hazing and fuzzying, or pixelated options. Now, it's not so obvious here because it's moving so quickly you really couldn't see it. But if you were here, you'll notice that I can see it. There's little pixelizations within every circle. So that means that this image later on down the line, the images themselves would have to be fairly decently sized, especially if you're taking up your entire space. If you're not taking up your entire space, it's not so much of an issue. So if this was like maybe half this size, that would be probably more in line with, with a slight degradation that you could see. However, it just really just depends on the situation and what you're doing. It's just something to keep in mind. But I mean, this changes a lot of things because you're basically creating the images from another program, or there's multiple ways you could do that, right? So I think this is visually stimulating. I think there's lots of things that you could do with this. Being able to swap out the images themselves is also interesting as well, because technically you wouldn't even need to do a sprite sheet. You could use multiple images. Now, that being said, it just depends on how fast it can recall it and whether or not that's going to cause issues with processing, which is something I got to test out. But that's not, that's not anything crazy. I'm already testing out a whole bunch of things. The thing that would be interesting with that is then you're basically create like templates for specific scenarios, right? So if you wanted to isolate a specific place, you could do that, and that would actually be kind of visually interesting as well. Now that I think about it, you could do like map slices, and then if you wanted certain areas to be highlighted, for instance, you have a projection mapping. And in the projection mapping, let's just say for the sake of argument, you wanted to you wanted to change where, like, you had a triangle, right, and there was a beam of light that was coming from the middle, and then you wanted the beam of light, instead of coming from the middle, you wanted it on the edges. You could create masks that are created, pre-set up, and then you could swap between the different pre-created slices, which that in its own right is, that adds a great deal of functionality. So there's lots of things to think about and how it's set up. I think that all of this together is very interesting. I keep saying it and I'll say it again. Bravo to the Resolume Wire folks. They do a fantastic job. I'm very appreciative of all your guys' watching what it is that I'm doing. And, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it. I hope you have a great day, and I'll talk to you guys later.